A Ukrainian strike on January 3 on Russian-occupied Tokmak in Zaporizhia Oblast killed and wounded 80 Russian soldiers, according to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces. The General Staff didn't specify how many soldiers were killed and how many wounded. The report also said that more than 100 members of the Russian state-controlled paramilitary Wagner Group are currently being treated in a hospital in occupied Luhansk. Earlier on January 1, Ukraine's armed forces hit a Russian military base in occupied Makiivka in Donetsk Oblast. According to the Strategic Communications Department of Ukraine's military, the strike killed 400 Russian soldiers and injured at least 300. The Donbas region, made up of Ukraine's eastern Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, is the scene of the war's most intense fighting as Russia seeks to capture the entire region. Russia invaded and partially occupied the region in 2014, including Donetsk, the regional capital of Donetsk Oblast. Since the start of the full-scale invasion in February, Russia has occupied nearly all of Luhansk Oblast but has only managed to occupy about a half of Donetsk Oblast. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned in an overnight address Tuesday that Russia is planning to ramp up its aggression and will throw everything they have in an attempt to turn the war around. Little progress has been made by either side since the harsher winter months set in, though Russia saw major losses in Kharkiv and Kherson between September and November last year. Ukrainian forces have also continued to push the lines further east into Donetsk, with some of the fiercest battles now taking place around the Donbas region, where Russian-backed forces have been fighting since 2014. Zelensky suggested that stopping this looming offensive will be the final defeat in the war against Russia, which has raged for more than 10 months. Zelensky did not expand on what Kyiv suspects Russia will do in this major offensive, nor did he comment on preemptive defensive measures Ukrainian forces are gearing up for. But the warning from the Ukrainian president comes less than 2 weeks after Russian President Vladimir Putin called on his defense forces to overhaul his war effort by not only reinforcing troops on the front lines in Ukraine, but by making sure they have the arms, supplies, and equipment they need. Medical waste and military clothes belonging to wounded Ukrainian soldiers outside a hospital on December 26, 2022, in Bakhmut, Ukraine. Putin also called on Russia's Defense Military Board to expand missile stockpiles, boost the combat readiness of Russia's nuclear triad, and ready what he called the world's most powerful warhead, the intercontinental ballistic Satan II missile, for combat duty. Putin signaled last month that another mobilization will not be needed after he called up 300,000 men in September to join the war, a figure that was double the number of troops he stationed on Ukraine's border ahead of the invasion. Though some reporting has suggested Moscow will order another mass conscription among fighting-age men to join the war and will close Russia's borders to prevent them from evading the order. It is unclear how many Russian soldiers are fighting in Ukraine, and death tolls have not been confirmed. U.S. officials in November said some 100,000 Russian soldiers are estimated to have been killed or injured in the fighting, though a breakdown of the casualties was not provided. Ukraine has claimed that nearly 109,000 Russian troops have died in the war, though these figures have not been verified. Price stressed that the U.S. Department of State had already taken steps to disrupt this proliferation network. In particular, the U.S. administration has imposed sanctions against persons involved in the supply of weapons. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on December 19 that Russia had received a new batch of 250 Shahid-136 kamikaze drones from Iran, which Moscow uses to attack Ukraine's power grid. The chief of Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, Kyrylo Budanov, said that Russia was also seeking to acquire Iranian ballistic missiles and ammunition. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia was planning to call up more troops for a major new offensive, even as Moscow was facing some of its biggest internal criticism of the war over a strike that killed scores of fresh conscripts. Kyiv has been saying for weeks that Russian President Vladimir Putin plans to order another mass conscription drive and shut his borders to prevent men from escaping the draft. Russia's defense ministry on Wednesday blamed mobile phone use by its soldiers for a Ukrainian strike on New Year's Eve in Makiivka in the Donbas that had killed 89 servicemen, the deadliest incident Moscow has acknowledged for its troops since the start of the war. If Russia is planning a new mobilization, the deaths of scores of conscripts on New Year's Eve could undermine morale. Hundreds of thousands of men fled Russia when Putin ordered the first call-up of reservists since World War II in September after military setbacks. Putin said last month there was no need for further mobilization. But in a sign the Kremlin may now be considering one, A little-known group claiming to represent supposed widows of Russian soldiers released a call on Tuesday for Putin to order a large-scale mobilization of millions of men. Russia has effectively shut down all direct opposition to the war, with open criticism banned by severe media rules. But it has given comparatively free rein to pro-war bloggers, some with hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. Vladimir Putin watches video as a frigate goes to the Atlantic Ocean armed with hypersonic Zircon cruise missiles, January 4, 2023, Mikhail Klementiev/Sputnik. Russian President Vladimir Putin attended by videoconference the mission launch of Admiral Gorshkov, a warship equipped with new hypersonic cruise missiles. The frigate is poised to travel across the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans, as well as traverse the Mediterranean, and conduct exercises with the 3M-22 Tsirkin missile. He pointed out that the Tsirkin hypersonic missiles were capable of overcoming any current or future air defense system, and could perform powerful and precise strikes at sea and on land. The Russian military command has faced fresh criticism in recent days after Ukrainian strikes with U.S. HIMARS rocket launchers on New Year's Eve killed at least 89 soldiers out of hundreds gathered en masse in one building in Makiyivka, a Donetsk conurbation in the Donbass. Ukraine's general staff also said Russian forces continued to concentrate on advancing in the area of Bakhmut, a city in Donetsk now largely reduced to ruins after months of fighting, while also trying to improve their positions elsewhere along the front line in that region. Mikhail Razvozayev, the Russian-installed governor of Sevastopol in Crimea, said on Wednesday on the Telegram messaging app that air defense systems had shot down 2 drones near the Belbek military airfield. Natural gas storage levels in the European Union stand at nearly 84% and were higher in December than the average amount in reserve 4 to 6 years ago, the bloc's executive branch said Wednesday, despite Russian attempts to choke off supplies amid its war on Ukraine. Fearing winter shortages, the 27 EU countries began stocking up on gas last year. Joint gas reserve levels climbed to 82% by September, well ahead of an 80% target set for November. Gas consumption also dropped by 20% from August to November as prices spiked. Angered by EU war-related sanctions, Russia tightened its gas taps to Europe last year. Its pipeline gas accounted for 40% of all gas Europe imported before President Vladimir Putin ordered his troops into Ukraine in late February, but now it only accounts for around 9%. The Commission estimates that joint gas storage levels stand at almost 84% and that storage levels in December were 13% higher than the EU average in 2016 to 2018. Energy prices have also tumbled in recent months, in part due to milder-than-expected winter weather. The first regular shipment of liquefied natural gas from the United States arrived in Germany on Tuesday, part of wide-ranging European efforts to find new, more reliable suppliers and replace resources once bought from Russia. Ukraine wants the United Nations to send peacekeepers to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant even without a deal with Russia to establish a safety zone there, the head of Ukraine's state nuclear power company said. Ukraine has called for UN-led peacekeepers at the site since September. But the comment was the first time a Ukraine nuclear official has suggested publicly that peacekeepers should be deployed in the absence of an agreement to create a safety zone at the plant. Russia took control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant soon after launching the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24. The nuclear power station, Europe's largest, has suffered repeated shelling and power cuts, raising concerns of a radioactive catastrophe. Ukraine and Russia have traded blame for the bombardment. Rafael Grossi, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, had hoped to mediate an agreement between Russia and Ukraine on a safety zone by January. Petro Kotin, the head of Ukraine's state nuclear power company Energodom, said the absence of a deal means the UN Security Council, of which Russia is a permanent member, should deploy peacekeepers. The prospects were uncertain. Russia could veto any Security Council resolution for peacekeepers. But Kotin said this would raise public awareness of Moscow's actions. In October, Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a decree transferring the plant from Energodom to a subsidiary of Russia's Rosatom, a move Kyiv said amounted to theft. Drone advances in Ukraine have accelerated a long-anticipated technology trend that could soon bring the world's first fully independent fighting robots to the battlefield, inaugurating a new age of warfare. Those drones include the US-made Switchblade 600 and the Polish Warmate, which both currently require a human to choose targets over a live video feed. AI finishes the job. The drones, technically known as loitering munitions, can hover for minutes over a target, awaiting a clean shot. Drones can already recognize targets such as armored vehicles using cataloged images. But there is disagreement over whether the technology is reliable enough to ensure that the machines don't err and take the lives of non-combatants. According to our best estimates, at least 60,000 Russian troops were killed and 3 times as many were wounded, which means that about 250,000 Russian troops are now incapable of fighting. Blagian stated that the Kremlin has lost 60% of its total stock of battle tanks and 70% of its stock of ground attack missiles. He added that 40% of armored personnel carriers and 20% of artillery were disabled by then. The admiral noted that it is more difficult to estimate the losses on the Ukrainian side. He said that the EU believes they are lower than the Russian ones, but still significant. As of January 4, Ukraine's General Staff reports that since the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, Moscow's losses amount to about 108,910 troops. Moscow confirmed that 89 of their troops died following the New Year's Eve strike in the Russian-held town of Makiyivka near the Ukrainian city of Donetsk. In their latest intelligence report on the Ukraine war, the UK Ministry of Defence said the high number of casualties was probably caused by ammunition being stored near to troop accommodation. The strike, and resulting loss of life, is a massive blow to Vladimir Putin as the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine approaches. The day before the attack, UK intelligence said that continued churn of senior military figures in the Russian army is an indication of the military's internal struggles. The Russian president also recently made a rare admission that the war was not going to plan. Speaking to security workers in a video address, he acknowledged the ongoing situation in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, 2 of the 4 Ukrainian areas Russia has illegally annexed, is extremely difficult. Moscow is said to have lost up to 100,000 troops throughout the war, with remaining soldiers running low on morale and basic supplies. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the UK's Chief of Defence Staff, also predicted in mid-December that the war will only get worse for Russia as the cupboard is bare. The cost of shooting down Iranian-made drones over Ukraine can far outweigh the price of manufacturing them, offering Russia an advantage in its invasion of the country, the New York Times reported. While the Shahed 136 drones being deployed by Russia cost as little as $20,000 to make, shooting one out of the sky can cost between $140,000 and $500,000, the Times reported. Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces have increasingly relied on the Shahed 136, which self-destructs on contact with its target. As Ukraine rang in the new year, it faced a barrage of 84 of these drones, with its air force saying it shot down every last one. Ukraine has used a wide variety of methods to stop the drones, including bringing Soviet-era anti-aircraft guns back into play. Small arms fire and missiles fired from warplanes have also been deployed. But the Shahed 136 flies low and slow, and is literally trying to fly under the radar, James Rogers, an associate professor in war studies at the University of Southern Denmark who has advised the UN on drones, told Insider in December. Launched in waves of 6 or 7 at a time, the drones aim to act as a rudimentary swarm to overwhelm defenses. During the New Year's onslaught, Ukrainian officials said they deployed a more costly option to counter them, several times firing missiles from National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, the Times reported. NASAMS is a short to mid-range air defense system sent to Ukraine by the US in November. Firing it, the Times reported, costs $500,000. But Matthew Beleg, a Russia expert at London's Chatham House, told the newspaper that the cost was irrelevant as long as the West keeps providing military assistance to Ukraine. In December, the US announced it would send its most advanced missile defense system, the Patriot, to Ukraine. Mark Kanchan and Tom Caraco, military experts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who priced the Shahed drone at about $50,000, rather than $20,000, wrote about the issue in December. High-value Russian aircraft and ballistic missiles would be appropriate targets. Shooting $4 million missiles at $250,000 Russian cruise missiles might be justified if those missiles would hit sensitive targets. Shooting a $4 million missile at a $50,000 Iranian Shahed 136 drone would probably not. Ukrainian journalists have identified 4 Russian servicemen who were trained to operate Shahed kamikaze drones in Iran this summer. Quote, using military contests as a pretext, the Russian military in Iran learned to operate Shahed kamikaze drones. Shahed drones are launched over Ukraine by the military of the 294th State Center for Unmanned Aviation of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. In Kolomna, the Russians are training drone operators and testing new drones before sending them to the troops. In August 2022, Russian military personnel from this center underwent training in Iran. In addition, the time of the exercises in Iran coincided with the date of delivery of the first batch of Iranian-made drones to Russia. In addition to Russia and Iran, teams from Belarus and Armenia took part in the exercises. In 2022, the Games were held in the Iranian city of Kashan, with a secret air base nearby, where the Iranians trained Russian buyers to work with their drones. A Russian team, consisting of 13 military men, took part in the falcon hunting in 2022. The competition in Iran ended on August 27, and 2 weeks later Russia attacked Ukraine with Shahid UAVs for the first time. The toll from a Ukrainian New Year's missile strike on a Russian-controlled city in eastern Ukraine rose to 89 on Wednesday, upping pressure on Russia's military leadership. The strike on Makiivka has led to Moscow's biggest admission of loss of life since it sent troops to Ukraine in February 2022 and has been met with anger at home. The devastation from the strike intensified criticism of army commanders, with even pro-Kremlin commentators suggesting the death toll could be in the hundreds. The deadly strike came after months of discontent towards the military, since the Kremlin launched an unpopular mobilization drive. In the early hours of Wednesday, Russia's defense ministry said the death toll had climbed to 89. Thousands of people have been killed in Ukraine and millions forced to flee their homes since President Vladimir Putin ordered troops to attack on February 24. Following a wave of Russian strikes on Ukrainian targets, Moscow said Ukraine struck a temporary base in Makiivka at 12:01 a.m. local time on January 1, using US-supplied HIMARS rocket systems. Kyiv has taken responsibility for the strike and said the toll could be much higher. In a sign that criticism was being taken seriously, the influential head of Russia's state RT television channel Margarita Simonyan welcomed the army's promise that officials will be held accountable. There have been reports that the servicemen were quartered in an unprotected building which was destroyed because munitions were stored on the premises and detonated in the strike. As Moscow grappled with the aftermath of the Makiivka strike, authorities in Russia-annexed Crimea as well as the southern Rostov region said drones had been shot down over their territories. The governor of the Rostov region Vasily Golubyev said the region's air defense systems went off in a village outside the major city of Rostov-on-Don. In Samara, some 200 people gathered on Tuesday to mourn the Makiivka troops as an Orthodox priest recited a prayer. Russia's focus on Makiivka desisted could be deliberate, expert says. I will say that it could be 50-50 here, as bad PR is still PR, said Zhdanov, commenting on how much Russian media has been talking about the recent disaster in occupied Makiivka, where a Ukrainian artillery strike destroyed enemy barracks with hundreds of mobilized troops inside. Zhdanov noted that this is part of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's strategy to recast the invasion of Ukraine as an existential, patriotic war for Russia's survival. He also recalled the words of Kirill Gundyev, head of Moscow's Orthodox Church, that one shouldn't die of vodka, one should go and die of a bullet or a shrapnel. On January 4, Le Figaro reported that, according to the commander of the European Union military mission, Admiral Hervé Blagian, Russia had lost 250,000 soldiers killed and wounded in Ukraine by November 2022. On January 1, the armed forces of Ukraine struck Russian military barracks in occupied Makiivka, Donetsk Oblast. According to Ukrainian journalist Denis Kazansky, the strike was carried out by a HIMARS rocket artillery, targeting a building where Russian commanders quartered troops and stored ammunition. While the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that nearly 100 soldiers were killed in the attack, Ukrainian reports suggest the death toll could be in the hundreds. Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, has said that Russia is getting ready for an escalation of the situation on the front line in February, while Taras Kozak, an associate of Viktor Medvedchuk, a pro-Kremlin Ukrainian politician and personal friend of Putin, is having meetings with Europeans and trying to persuade them to sign peace deals akin to Minsk III, a series of international agreements which sought to end the conflict in Donbass. February will be decisive for them. Because dates, anniversaries, etc., are important for them, edition. They are preparing for an escalation. Now a man by the name of Kozak has become more active. He is holding meetings with European representatives in order to force us to sign certain peace agreements, or so they believe, akin to Minsk III. The Munich Security Conference will take place in the second half of February, and on 23 to 24 February there are events in New York. The Red Cross has now begun to be very worried about what we are killing Russians with. There are many indications that there may be some escalation in February. Let's see where this offensive will be, at what point in the world it will begin. It will be necessary. It will be interesting. We will not keep our enemy waiting for long. They, the international community, edition, consider the map of our country as the main battlefield on which to attack these terrorists. We will chase these rats all over the planet, they will not hide from us anywhere. Taras Kozak escaped to Belarus when the Ukrainian authorities opened a criminal case against him for high treason and an attempt to steal natural resources from Ukraine. Sources say he is hiding in Russia and that his partner owns real estate in Moscow. The U.S. government introduced personal sanctions against Kozak on January 20 for his involvement in undermining Ukraine's sovereignty. Pro-Putin operatives with connections to the Kremlin have joined forces with fringe political movements in Germany in an attempt to push Europe's largest economy away from its support of Ukraine. We must stop being vassals of the Americans, right-wing German politician Markus Biesigk said at a rally in Cologne of over 2,000 people that was aimed at pressuring Berlin to break away from its support of Ukraine, according to a report from Reuters Tuesday. The report said Biesigk is one of several people working inside Germany for friendlier relations with Moscow amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine, helping lead a movement that has attempted to tap deep emotional connections between Russia and Germany in hopes Europe's foremost economic power will change course. Destabilization of an adversary from within through subversion is part of Putin's playbook, Rebecca Koffler, a former DIA intelligence officer and the author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America, told Fox News Digital. Germany is the European Union's largest economy and a leader of what has been a united Europe, a delicate coalition of countries who have so far been steadfast in their support of Ukraine. If any movement to turn Berlin against Kiev were to succeed, it would deal a critical blow to a country that has depended on Western military assistance to survive under an onslaught of Russian forces. Russia seeks to fracture NATO but cannot use military force because it would trigger collective defense clause, starting World War III, Koffler said. So, on Putin's orders, a special strategy was developed called indirect action, which Russia uses to target Germany and other NATO countries. It regularly infiltrates spies into these countries and recruits human assets within those governments in order to influence their policies in favor of Russia and Putin. Germany has sent over €1 billion in humanitarian aid, military equipment and advanced air defense systems to Ukraine since the war began, and polls show the majority of Germans still support Ukraine. But the polling also indicated support for German military support for Ukraine may be waning as Berlin attempts to tackle the steep rise in energy costs facing its citizens. According to Koffler, Russia's experience in East Germany also gives the Kremlin a leg up on running such a campaign. As the war nears its second year, Ukraine will continue to depend on the support of a united Europe and the US. But as energy costs continue to rise, the pro-Putin movement within Germany threatens to capitalize on the economic situation and push Berlin away from Kiev. According to Koffler, the groundwork for such a success was laid by Moscow long ago.